Welcome back to the Zambian Watch. We're back with yet another exciting and slightly provocative episode where we just explore the balance of power and the inner workings of government. Today, we're taking a closer look at the power dynamics in Zambia, specifically how the executive arm has, at times, overridden the autonomy of the judiciary. While Zambia's constitution enshrines the independence of the judiciary, there have been significant instances where executive influence has challenged this ideal, raising questions about the limits of judicial power. So in this video, we'll just explore three key moments in Zambia's recent history where constitutional interpretations or amendments seemingly advance the interests of those in power. Join us as we break down how these cases reveal the extensive reach of executive authority in Zambia and its impact on the judiciary's role as an impartial safeguard. But just to understand the issue at hand, let's start with a quick overview of how these three arms of government are supposed to work. Just like a three-legged stool, the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary each play a vital role in supporting the balance of power. They ensure no single branch becomes too powerful. In theory, this system, called the separation of powers, keeps power in check and prevents any single group from dominating decision-making. Here's how it's supposed to work. The executive branch, led by the president and his ministers, enforces laws and manages day-to-day government affairs. The legislature or parliament makes and approves laws, comprised of members of parliament, and the judiciary interprets these laws, ensuring justice is served. This separation acts as a safeguard, balancing each arm like gears in a well-oiled machine. But here's the twist. In Zambia, like in some other countries, this balance can become skewed. Imagine if one leg of that stool decided it didn't want to, share the load. When the executive wields too much influence, he can put pressure on both the legislature and the judiciary, essentially bending them to its will. So today, we're going to dive into three instances in Zambia where this has happened, exploring how the executive's overriding power has influenced judicial decisions, altered the constitution, and weakened the judiciary's autonomy, all while advancing its own agenda. So scenario 1. Let's go back to Zambia in 1996. Up until then, Zambia had recently emerged as a shining example of democracy in Africa. In 1991, after years of one-party rule under President Kenneth Kaunda and his United National Independence Party, UNIP, Zambia experienced its first major democratic transfer of power. Frederick Chiluba, leading the newly formed Movement for Multi-Party Democracy, MMD, swept into office, promising change, accountability, and an end to authoritarianism. But like every good political drama, things took a turn. Just a few years into his presidency, Chiluba's democratic charm started fading. By 1996, the MMD government was acting suspiciously like the one-party state it had defeated. So enter the Great Amendment of 1996. As the next election approached, the Chiluba administration suddenly had a bright idea. Why not update the constitution a bit? And by update, I mean make a few convenient tweaks to disqualify any pesky rivals from even entering the race. The most eye-popping change was the requirement that anyone running for president had to be a Zambian citizen, born to Zambian parents, and couldn't be a tribal chief. Sounds innocent, right? But here's the thing, it seemed custom-made to exclude one person in particular, Kenneth Kaunda himself, whose parents were from Malawi. Coincidence? Not quite. To give it perspective, imagine a soccer game where just before kickoff, the referee announces that only players wearing blue socks can compete. And guess what? Only Chiluba and his team have blue socks. You'd be right to call foul play. And that's exactly how the Zambian public felt. Civic organizations, human rights groups, and opposition parties cried out against the changes, especially since they clearly sidelined key opposition leaders, specifically Kaunda. Now, Zambia is a party to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which basically says you cannot slap unreasonable restrictions on who can run for office. So here was Chiluba, changing the game to keep the top prize for himself, while international observers looked on in shock. So by Zambian law, changes like this have to be done through a referendum. But the whole amendment package was pushed through the MMD-dominated parliament with no referendum, despite a strong recommendation for one from a constitutional review commission the previous year in 1995. So the opposition had enough of it. UNIP and 5 other allied political parties boycotted the elections entirely. And guess what? Chiluba still ran, he still won with an overwhelming 72% of the vote. It's worth mentioning that this president for life approach came back to bite Chiluba himself in 2001 when he tried for a third term and met serious resistance from civil society groups and the international community. Turns out, rewriting the rules for personal gain has a funny way of coming back around. Karma is a... Alright, let's break this down. The story of President Edgar Lungu's rise and his efforts to hold on to power begins with his first big win in a 2015 by-election. After the untimely death of President Michael Sata, Lungu stepped in to complete Sata's remaining term. Now, this was supposed to be a temporary stay. The man clearly admitted he had no vision, except he wanted to complete Sata's vision. But once he had his foot in the door, Lungu saw a chance to stay a little longer. In 2016, Lungu managed to win a full 5-year term as president. But before that election, he made a key move. His administration rolled out a new constitution that included a redefined concept of what counted as a full presidential term. According to the new rules, a term wouldn't be considered full unless a president served at least 3 years. Since Lungu's initial stint was only 20 months, it was officially redefined as a non-term, essentially giving him a reset on the term limits clock. But that wasn't the only hurdle. The 2016 election results were hotly contested. The opposition party, that is, the United Party for National Development, UPND, led by Hakainde Hichilema, argued that the vote was made by irregularities and took the matter to the Constitutional Court, hoping to challenge Lungu's narrow victory. However, the court dismissed the petition without much fuss, allegedly over the weekend, ruling in favor of upholding the election results. This decision had big consequences down the line, as we will see, regarding the court's judges. So fast forward to the lead up to the 2021 election, where the big question on everyone's mind was Lungu's eligibility. By this point, Lungu had technically been elected twice, and many believed his time was up, but the Constitutional Court was about to weigh in on whether he could run again. Not one to take chances, Lungu even issued a veiled warning to the judges, reminding them not to get inspired by Kenya's 2017 Supreme Court ruling, which famously annulled their presidential election on grounds of irregularities. Lungu framed his advice as a plea for peace and stability in Zambia, a subtle hint at the consequences of crossing him. So when it came time to decide, the Constitutional Court took a holistic approach, interpreting the Constitution by reading different clauses together rather than isolating them. This approach, unsurprisingly, worked in Lungu's favor. So by piecing together the constitutional clauses on eligibility, the court ruled that since his first term didn't meet the 3-year threshold, he didn't count as a full term. Therefore, he was eligible to run again in 2021. In short, Lungu's ability to influence the judiciary, especially through his power to appoint judges to the Constitutional Court, allowed him to shape rulings that supported his political ambitions. I mean, who wouldn't? And while he did ultimately lose the 2021 election, the chain of events underscores how the executive's reach over the judiciary can blur the lines between independent judgment and political convenience. Here we are in 2024. And it seems the Zambian judiciary is back in the spotlight. This time, President Hakainde Hichilema has drawn sharp criticism after he dismissed 3 Constitutional Court judges who had previously ruled against him back in 2016. So let's rewind to 2016. Hichilema, then an opposition leader, had just lost to Edgar Lungu in a tightly contested election. He challenged the results, but judges Mungeni Mulenga, Palan Musonda, and Anis Itali threw out his case, allegedly over the weekend. Fast forward to today, and these same judges are in the hot seat for alleged misconduct. So Hichilema's administration set up an inquiry through the Judicial Complaints Commission, JCC, to investigate these judges. The JCC, which enforces judicial ethics, reported on allegations of bias and questionable rulings. After the inquiry, the JCC recommended that the judges be removed, and Hichilema promptly acted on it. So critics see this move as a politically motivated cleanup, especially given that these judges also ruled in favor of allowing Lungu to run again in 2021, a decision that came under fire since Lungu had already served twice as president. According to the constitution, Zambian presidents are capped at 2 5-year terms, but in a holistic reading of the law, the court had decided that Lungu's first 20-month term didn't count as a full term, giving him a second go at the presidency. The timing of the judge's dismissal is sparking even more debates. With the 2026 general elections around the corner, it's expected that Hichilema and Lungu will face off yet again, unless, of course, there are some adjustments to the constitution or further interpretations by the Concourt. Some observers note that there are lacunas or gaps in the constitution that need clarification. So everyone's waiting to see if the law will get a little fine-tuning before the big, rematch. This case raises questions about the balance of power between Zambia's executive and judiciary. Are we seeing the judiciary being held accountable, or is it just a play by the president to ensure that there are no roadblocks on his way to 2026? Only time will tell. Now let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. These kinds of maneuvers with judicial systems and constitutions are by no means unique to Zambia. Across the world, we see similar scenarios where leaders play political chess, pushing constitutional boundaries to stretch, shift, or outright ignore term limits. Think about it. What if a president someday decided to adjust the constitution to say, 2 terms, sure enough, but as long as I can step down every few years, reset, and come back. Imagine a leader who cleverly serves for just under 3 years, steps down, and then runs again. By never technically completing a full term, they could keep running indefinitely under loopholes, essentially achieving lifetime tenure without ever formally scrapping the 2-term limit. Or consider the idea of presidents taking inspiration from parliamentary systems, where members can keep running as long as they keep winning. They could push to remove the 2-term limit entirely, arguing that voters should have the freedom to choose the same leader again and again. Before you know it, we're back to presidents for life, all while keeping up the appearance of democracy. So as long as power is tempting and power is sweet, and the constitution provides even the slightest room, these strategies will likely continue. In other words, term limits and judicial independence might seem like safeguards, but they're only as strong as the people interpreting them. And as we've seen, in the right hands or wrong hands, depending on your perspective, these checks and balances can be bent in ways the original framers never intended. So what's the point of all this? Let's be clear. This isn't about blaming politicians or singling out any specific leader. The reality is, these maneuvers, stretching rules, bending interpretations, and finding clever ways to stay in power are all rooted in basic human nature. We are wired to seek advantage, to play the game to win. In many ways, it's just survival of the fittest, or the smartest. A dance of power and strategy that's as old as civilization itself. The goal here isn't to criticize, but to understand. If we look at history, these strategies, these little rule-bending tricks, are simply part of how power operates. As long as there's a position of influence up for grabs, there will be people smart enough to find ways around any obstacle. And in a way, that's what keeps politics interesting. So thank you for watching, and let me know in the comments what you think. Give me your critique, give me your critiques, give me your opinions, and let's engage. And don't forget to subscribe and like for more insights from the Zambian Watch. Stay blessed, and see you next time.